Do the Cincinnati Bengals suddenly have a bottom half of the NFL roster? I'm not quite buying it. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Jake Liscow. He's James Rapien. We've been covering the Cincinnati Bengals here on Locked On Bengals since 2016. So if you're looking for the place for all of the latest news and analysis on the Cincinnati Bengals, you are in the right place. The everydayers who make Locked On Bengals part of their routine already know that. We appreciate those great listening habits. You can join those everydayers by hitting the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, and make sure you don't miss an episode of Locked On Bengals. You can even go so far as to take the step to be one of those that makes Locked On Bengals their first listen and join those folks with another great listening habit. Today we dive into the claim from Pro Football Focus, James, that the Cincinnati Bengals have a bottom half of the NFL roster. PFF sees it as the Bengals roster has fallen off precipitously from 2024, when they had the Bengals ranked as the 7th best roster in the league. Now they see it as 18th best. And in addition to that conversation, we get into what the quote-unquote long-term future looks like for the Cincinnati Bengals. And in my opinion, the NFL long-term is about 1 year. So we're talking 2026 when we talk long-term. We'll get there a little bit later. Let's start with this idea that the Bengals have a bottom half of the league roster 18th, according to PFF.
Yeah, and behind teams like the Falcons, like the Bears, like the Cowboys, all teams that I think Bengals fans, certainly most listening and watching, would have ahead of those teams, would have the Bengals ahead of those teams. I'm not buying it either. And the reason why I think when you look at the Bengals, and it's a top-heavy roster, and I think we'll agree there, but the top is awesome. Best receiver on the planet. One of the best certainly number two wide receivers in the league, maybe the best number two wide receiver in the league. I buried the lead with the quarterback, who you could argue, and depending on where you look or what you look, that he's as good as anyone at quarterback on the planet, ahead of Patrick Mahomes, right there with any of these guys, from Lamar Jackson to Josh Allen to whoever you think is the best quarterback in the league. The point is they have one of those dudes. And so when you're talking about that trio and the NFL sack leader, which PFF did that with Trey Hendrickson on the roster, and he is on the roster, so we're going to count him. It's a heck of a place to start. And I'm not putting the Falcons ahead of them. I'm not putting the teams that have serious questions put it at quarterback unless they're so complete that they can overcome it. And I don't feel like the Cowboys are that, or the Falcons are that, or the Bears are that. And so, yeah, they're too low. It's just that they are too low. And I get it. I know why PFF did it. They're going to say all of these ifs and questions, and there are ifs and questions. And both of us, I think, have been very clear about our frustration with what the Bengals haven't done this offseason to address specific areas. And even with that said, they still have a chance to be really, really, really good because of those top players that they have on their roster.
Yeah, I don't think anyone's writing off the season or saying, the Bengals are going to be on the outside of the playoffs looking in, at least not on this podcast. There's obviously a possibility that happens. There's a possibility that what they've done to try to fix the defense, the Al Golden hire, the defensive additions in the draft, there's a possibility those things just don't hit. They don't work out. But what's interesting about this is, take, for example, the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers are below the Bengals in these rankings at 21. And that is with a pretty stacked defense. And I know they lost a wide receiver. They add DK Metcalf, so they have some questions of wide receiver. Pat Freiermuth is a good tight end. Zach Frazier was great as a rookie. Isaac Seumalo is still good at left guard. Troy Fautanu, solid PFF score for his rookie year. And for the most part, they really like the defense at PFF, especially the front. And so if Pittsburgh is behind Cincinnati and they have a roster that on defense especially you would say is better than Cincinnati's, then I guess I'm just confused about the methodology here, because the Bengals do have those bona fides. They have Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins,
Yep.
and you add to that on the defensive side, Trey Hendrickson for your stars, your collection of stars, right? And then you have solid players to above solid players, good players in Chase Brown, in Mike Gesicki, in Logan Wilson, in BJ Hill. And then I get that there are questions, but the roster is largely the same. Like Mike Hilton's gone, Sheldon Rankins is no longer with the Bengals, and there's a new right guard. For now, they're still penciling in Cordell Volson at left guard, so there's a new right guard. Alex Kappa is no longer with the Bengals, but we've complained that the Bengals didn't turn over their roster enough, right? That it was largely the same team. And largely the same team last year for PFF was 7th. And this year it's 18th, even though Joe Burrow is coming off his best year and Jamar Chase is coming off a triple crown. And like the stars were the stars.
Yep.
And so like you dig into it a little bit and you look at the grades and you can start to piece together, okay, maybe this is why PFF puts them there, is because there's not a single offensive lineman besides Ted Karras who cracks a 60. Brown playing hurt last year comes in at a 58. Amarius Mims going through some rookie growing pains at a 57.8. Cordell Volson grading higher than both of them at 59.3. I don't think anyone that watched the Bengals thinks Cordell Volson was better than those guys last year. Dax Hill, Geno Stone, Cam Taylor-Britt, DJ Turner, all those guys in the secondaries in the 50s and 60s were fair. A lot of questions with all of those guys. But I feel like 18 is assuming that all of them hit the low end of their range of outcomes, right? There's no, like, Dax Hill takes a step and is healthy for a year. DJ Turner is healthy for the whole year, and he's a solid corner. Cam Taylor-Britt bounces back to, closer to a 70 than a 60. And so, like, if you take the middle path somewhere in there, there's still questions. For sure, there's still questions. But I have a hard time seeing how largely the same roster, with a few changes, is 11 spots worse in a year.
And especially, I mean, did the Bengals beat the Broncos at Paycor like 5 times in one game? Did they? They did, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. They did. The Broncos are ninth.
I thought it was rhetorical. Sorry.
It was, but the Broncos are ninth. And I look, you could say, oh, well, and I'm sure, by the way, if you want Broncos breakdown, check out Locked On Broncos. But the point is, I don't think that they're 9 spots ahead of the Bengals, and someone's got to be 18th and fine. You described it pretty well. Low range of outcomes. This is one of the lowest range of outcomes for this Bengals roster. This isn't overall outlook for the next 5 years. This isn't what does it mean if Trey Hendrickson isn't on the team, or if the Bengals don't keep this guy, or if it's what their roster is. I look at their roster and yeah, it's top heavy. Yeah, I wish they would have added multiple veterans, but they're better in certain areas. They are better in certain areas. They're deeper in some areas. And the coaching, I'm not sure the coaching part of it can get worse. I think there's a lot of pressure on these coaches, but I think we're seeing very clearly how Zach Taylor and the rest of the organization felt about some of the coaches that were on the staff by the end of last year. So this path where healthy Joe and Jamar and T and Trey and Al Golden, and where these guys are 18th in the league from a roster talent standpoint, I don't see it. I think it would take a lot of things to go wrong for that to be the case. Now, they're not top 7, but I certainly don't think that they're 18th. And that element of it is pretty off. I would expect them to be top 12. If they do this in December, I would expect the Bengals to be top 12 in the roster ranking for sure.
I would. Well, let's circle back to this in just a second and talk about where we think would be fair, because it's not like we thought the Cincinnati Bengals got much better in spots when we just talked about that. It was 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we talked about where the Bengals got actually better and where there are all these questions. And we've talked about with Joe Goodberry a couple of episodes, again, 2-3 weeks ago, about how the Bengals can get better. But let's talk about a little bit more where we think they should be in these rankings before we dive into a bit of a longer term view coming up next.
Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? I've done that. And whether it's dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. Right now, we are in the thick of like birthday month / holiday month because we had mother-in-law's birthday, my mom's birthday, father-in-law's birthday, my dad's birthday, Father's Day, Mother's Day, all these things. My wife's birthday. Did I mention that? Oh my goodness. It's hard to keep track of everything. And that's why Monarch Money is here for you, because Monarch Money is going to help you keep track of everything. And it's not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments, all of your spending in one place. Training camp is right around the corner. My life gets really hectic. Monarch Money is going to help me stay in the lane and make sure that I can check all of the things from long-term goals to short-term goals and spending in one spot. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money by using code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com to get 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year.
I can already hear people in the YouTube comments, James, telling us about how we've been complaining about this roster, complaining about the moves they didn't make. And what do you mean it's a top 12 roster? You guys are gassing up this team and they didn't do enough. But
they didn't.
That is true. And it's just it might even be a nitpick. Like maybe they're really close. And it probably is. Maybe it's really close for PFF between teams like 13 to 20. Maybe it's just really, really close. And the Bengals maybe should be closer to, 14. You said 12 if they do this in a while. Maybe that's where this ends up. But I do think that just, I don't know, something about bottom half of the league for this team with the talent that's on the team really feels like there's like an overcorrection here. There's an overcorrection for last year thinking like, yeah, the defense, Lou Anarumo, we like what they've done in the past. They should be able to put that together again, even if we have some questions there. There's a bit of an overcorrection that says like, Orlando Brown's like, he's regressing. Look at how he played last year, which maybe ignores that he was hurt. Maybe they don't think,
he was good last year until he got hurt.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Like if they're just ignoring that he was hurt and just looking at his grade, right? Which wouldn't surprise me if that's the way this came together. It's hard to cover all 32 NFL teams, and PFF leans heavily on their grades to do that. Looking at Amarius Mims, looking at Cody Ford, looking at, penciling Cordell Volson as a starter right now. And maybe they don't get better than those guys last year. Maybe they're the same offensive line that has all those issues. But again, to me, it feels a bit like an overcorrection. And when you still have the performance they had last year that included a really strong conclusion to the season and some regression to the mean, regression to average that you might expect on defense, that should at least get into the top half of the league in my mind. Like, I don't think that the Bengals are looking at like bottom. Yeah, I don't know. Bottom half of the league just feels wrong.
Way wrong. And it feels wrong because in December, realistically, you could say best quarterback in the league, best receiver in the league, one of the best pass rushers in the league. Now, that's the high range. And if those things happen, they're going to be in the top 10.
And you could argue they had that last year and they were still not great.
That you can't argue that though. Joe wasn't the best quarterback in the league last year. Like I get it, but he wasn't. Like Josh Allen won MVP. Lamar, they beat the Bengals head to head twice. Again, I get it. There's going to be a penalty here, this or that. It wasn't Joe's fault. Fine, but it matters. So like there's a scenario where that is. And I agree. Maybe numbers wise, it's similar, but it could be tweaked enough where you're saying the numbers are similar and he's the front runner for MVP. Like that stuff happens all the time because of the perception. When you're 4-8 after the first game of December and you get crushed defensively and you just can't beat Pittsburgh at home. Well, that's rough. But did anyone want to play them in the playoffs? The answer was no. Like that was a real thing. that was discussed in NFL circles and not just speculated on here. Flaws and all, they're still scary. You still don't want to deal with them. And so that's where it comes, like head to head against the Falcons. There's not many times when you're going to say a healthy Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and T. Higgins aren't going to go beat the Falcons. Sorry. It's just, it's realistic. And that's why top half, that's fine. If you want to put them 12th, 14th, whatever, but 18th is low. And if by the way, if in December we're talking about them being the 18th best roster in the league, then we're going to be pointing to everything that we've said about how they needed to add, and Joe can't take the hits that he's been taking, and that they're going to have to find a way to be much better on the interior of both lines to, one, be better against the run and get a pressure on the passer, and the other way, be a more efficient, more capable running team, especially in short yardage situations. Like all of these things, all of these flaws, it's because they'll be magnified and they'll be such big issues that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Trey Hendrickson, that these guys can't overcome them. And maybe it's as simple as Trey's contract stuff gets in the way, messes with him all season long. Like, you never know.
Mm-hmm.
But if those guys, if you're throwing out the ball or going up to Cleveland and going out for the coin toss, and it's Joe, Jamar, and T, and Trey Hendrickson's dialed in, you feel pretty good, even with Myles Garrett and Mason Graham and all those guys on the other side. And that's going to feel that way for all the games. If that's your starting point. And that would be what the Bengals, I think internally, when they hear us and they hear all these people criticizing them, that's probably what they are saying. I don't love it, but it still is true. And so when you rank them, I think they're a bit low here.
Yeah, they could have done more. That is true. This still feels a bit low because of all the things we've just mentioned. I would say the other big thing that if we look at this in a few months, the end of the year, I guess 6 months, and we're saying, yeah, this Bengals roster is exactly what everyone said it was going to be. It's the 18th best or worse, maybe. Who knows? We'll be talking a lot about the failure to develop because there are talented players on this team that they haven't gotten that level of play from. And Amarius Mims taking a big step is a part of that. Not that he was bad as a rookie, but he taking a big step on offense would be a big part of that. We just talked about Andre Yosevach. We talked about Jermaine Burton. Those guys taking a third and second year step and staying on the field in Jermaine Burton's case. Those things matter. And then on defense, this whole thing is around, we think we have more talented players than we've seen them produce.
Yep.
And we're going to change the coaching staff. So if Dax Hill and DJ Turner and Cam Taylor-Britt and these rookie linebackers and Shamar Stewart and Joseph Osai and Miles Murphy are the same players, and Chris Jenkins and McKinley Jackson and those guys, none of them get better, and a lot of young players in that list, then yeah, the Bengals don't have a good roster. And that's possible. It's possible that they're just not as talented as we think they are, and that they were all overdrafted, and that or that the development so far has set them back and has set them up for failure at this point. But if we're talking about this roster being that bad, then that means that you're probably talking about a coaching staff overhaul too, because all of your coaching changes didn't work and all of these things. So there's a lot at stake, obviously, on this season. And that's just that when you're talking about, if we're talking about them being 18th later, that's the things that come to mind for me is there's a lot of failure that's happened to get to that point.
Yeah. Oh, no doubt. Look in the mirror, firings, changes, all of the above. That's what that would be. You cannot miss the playoffs for a third consecutive year, and you have Joe Burrow. Well, let's just say Joe's playing at the level that he played at last year, or maybe even a little less. Can't do it. He can't do it. I mean, he set franchise records last year. As I knock my water over, set franchise records last year. You just can't do it. So, and by the way, I would bet that doesn't happen. I think last year was kind of the worst case scenario with those guys playing at that level. I want to talk about range of outcomes. And I think the Bengals are banking on that too. We'll see if they're right.
They could have taken other steps to build contingencies. And that's where you can see both sides of this, right? As we've said, they could have done more. They could have done things that would force PFF to put them higher, but also this feels like it's once again betting on a repeat of the low end of the range of outcomes. Let's finish the show by talking about the quote long-term future. This was a question from a mailbag a few weeks ago that we wanted to circle back to. We'll do that coming up next.
Long-term outlook says what? 5 straight Super Bowls, 4 wins, 1 narrow loss. What do you think, Jake?
I mean, it sounds good to me. That sounds like it's good for business, Let's do it. Why not?
I mean,
The
it's good. It would be good for a lot of things.
Yeah. Great for the Bengals, great for a bunch of Hall of Fame cases. You'd have a surge of Hall of Famers from the Cincinnati Bengals in 20 years or however long it takes, 15 years.
20.
Well, because they're going to keep playing too, right? And so like their
if they
careers
go to
aren't
5
over.
straight Super Bowls, they better retire Joe's number mid-game.
Mid-game. While he's still playing. Joe, sorry,
Yep.
you can't wear your number anymore. We got to retire.
No, we retired ahead of time. They're like, hey, we are retiring it.
Yeah.
But Joe, you can still wear it for the first time in NFL history. Look at that.
So the question that came in was a listener wanted to know what we see as a long-term outlook for the team. Defined by this person as 4 to 5 seasons, which you can't actually do in the NFL.
No.
So
this
listener thinks
3 eras.
This listener thinks it doesn't look very good today. A couple guys on offense are locked up. A bunch of unproven guys on defense with a future still in the air. Is there a soft rebuild coming? And I think the way I think about this question is I think at most you can think about 2 years into the future in the NFL. Mm-hmm. But practically, you're mostly thinking about 1 year into the future. You talk 4 or 5 years into the future, there's like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase under contract. I guess T. Higgins too. And that's it. The guys just aren't under contract that far into the future. You're talking about, especially 5 seasons, you're going to have your first round pick maybe on an option. Well, 5 seasons from now, nobody's under contract anymore. So when you think about the long-term outlook, the first thing that comes to mind to me, James, is a question that we were asking last year around this time, like, who are they going to pay? When we were asking, why aren't they paying T. Higgins? Why aren't they just getting the deal done with Jamar Chase? Why aren't they spending money? Because the question was, when we looked into the future, who are they going to pay? And that's where I start. Because last year when we looked forward, it was not obvious at all that there were extensions coming. And I would say that right now, it's pretty similar. When you look a year out and you think about who are the guys that are going to be the next building blocks, the next extension guys on this team.
Yep.
I think the question is right that there are a lot of unproven guys that would need to earn that extension this year.
Yeah, I think, I mean, a ton of guys. If you want to start, let's start on offense. I think Orlando Brown Jr. this year, let's say he stays healthy. He has 2 years left on his deal. He's someone that is going to be looking at an extension. Amarius Mims is 2 years away, so you're not thinking about that. I've mentioned a few times, just Ted Karras say 1 more year, or do they go the other way? And do they see what Matt Lee can do and what some of these other guys can do long-term? On defense, though, the one guy that really stands out to me is Dax Hill. The front office clearly holds him in high regard. They picked up his 5th-year option. He's going to be on the roster next year. Do you just cross that bridge now, or do you cross that bridge next offseason? Maybe that's what they do. But I do think that he's probably more likely now than last year, and that's the one. But there aren't many. Tyson Anderson I could see as a special teamer. I wonder if they do try to do something with him at some point as he goes into the final year of his deal. But there's just not many that jump out at you. Cam Taylor-Britt's in the final year of his deal. You're going to make him play that out. And so there aren't many. You're right. And I think that's scary. And what you hope is that Miles Murphy is in that discussion 8 months from now. Mm-hmm. That guys like that. But as of now, Joseph Osai, obviously, who signed a 1-year deal. But as of now, there just aren't many guys like that you could say. That's why I led with Orlando and Ted, because because there's just not many guys where you're like, will they get ahead of it? Yeah, maybe with Tyson Anderson as a special teamer, but I don't think that there are a lot of guys that fit that bill today.
There's one that I think you're forgetting that I think as soon as I say it, you're going to be like, oh, yeah, of course. But it's actually not super clear cut, but it's Chase Brown. Chase Brown will be extension eligible after 2025. That'll be his third year.
We'll see.
And
he's just had a lot of work. Like, do they
that's
go
why it's complicated, but he will be extension eligible, as will Andre Josevach, or those guys that they would like to get ahead of it on and get deals done early. Some guys that they've paid running backs. They just paid Joe Mixon. If Chase Brown goes out there and plays at a high level again, and Andre Josevach shows that he's a reliable wide receiver 3, are those deals that they want to get ahead of. Those are some young guys. When you look out to guys that would be free agents in 2027, Dax Hill also will be a free agent in 2027. Also, DJ Turner, if he has another good year. So, like, if Dax has a good year, DJ Turner has a good year, heck, even Jordan Battle, Chase Brown, Miles Murphy, Andre Josevach, like all of those young guys, those are players that would be extension eligible. I'm not saying they're going to sign all of those guys as soon as they're eligible for extensions after their third year. That's something that we've asked the Bengals to do more of. We might be talking about those guys, but those are the guys that I think when you think about long-term future, those are the guys in the conversation right now in my head. In addition to, obviously, Cam Taylor-Britt, to some extent, Cam Sample, if he has a good bounce-back year from that injury, that's another one that I'd throw out. But those are the guys that are youngish that could see new contracts.
Do you think that they would pay Andre with T and Jamar making what they're making?
Depends on what he's looking for, right? Like if he's looking for
10.
mid-receiver money, 10, 12, they probably don't, right? They probably say, we'll replace that in the draft. We can't afford to put more money at that position. Yeah. But I do think that would depend significantly on what kind of number he thinks
if he goes out and has like 700 yards this year and 8 touchdowns, let's just say, like he'll want double-digit millions.
Yeah, that gets to, what is that, 8 digits? That gets to 8 digits on the open market for sure.
Now, if he's $6 million, well then, yeah, Andre's great to have around. So I agree. I think it's interesting. The Chase Brown one he's 25. He's super reliable. Has had a couple injuries, but super reliable. Played a ton last year. Do they go that route or not? Because they haven't valued running back. You've seen that. But I think this year there were scenarios where they would have taken a running back earlier, ended up getting Taj Brooks. And they've seen what it's like when you can have guys that fit and Chase fits. So maybe you could see that. Hopefully he has a big year. I think there are a lot of people excited about Chase Brown. And that's what this year really is about, is by mid-year, going back to the PFF conversation, if Chase Brown is a top 10 running back in the league, or Andre Josevach is one of the best number 3 receivers in the NFL, and some of these defensive players step up, and you're talking about them being extension, like true extension, not just candidates, but contenders.
Worthy of extensions. Guys, that we're going to sit here and say the Bengals should prioritize extending these guys as early as possible, i.e. next offseason.
Can't let Miles Murphy go. Dax Hill, there's no way they should let him play on the 5th-year option. Cam Taylor-Britt, the juice is back, baby. He's awesome and better than ever. Like DJ Turner has put it all together. We'll see. You need some of those statements to be true. And it's a big year for that. And that's why I think they felt like they needed to make the moves they did coaching-wise.
I think that's the most interesting thing when you talk about the Bengals' long-term future, is we're looking at all of these guys we just mentioned, all of these highly invested draft picks, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I know Andre Josevach was a late rounder that we're talking about here. Chase Brown, late rounder. But on the defensive side of the ball, we're talking about high-end draft picks that the Bengals brought in for Lou Anarumo to keep that defense going. And they didn't keep that defense going with Lou Anarumo. So we're talking about Al Golden restoring that defense, getting enough out of these guys with his various position coaches, with the players themselves. And it's not just the coaches. If these guys don't work out, it's not just on the coaches. It will never be just on the coaches. It's never that simple. But obviously, there's a big part in what the Bengals are telling us is that they think that the coaching staff needs to do a better job of developing. And so write all those names down And in 6 months, we'll go back through a list on the Bengals bye week, which I was just looking at, and say, okay, which of these guys are we saying, yep, extend, extend, extend? It didn't work out. Not worthy of an extension. And that is what dictates the long-term future, those questions. And obviously the younger guys in that too, because those guys are under team control. But when you're talking about the decisions that they have to make, are these guys second contract guys for this team with our projected $60 million in salary cap space for 2026 and $120 million of salary cap space, which will be more, I think, than both of those numbers in 2027. Those are the questions that need to be answered.
Will Drew Sample play his way into another contract? All questions that we need to answer, Jake. All questions we need to answer.
Look, man, I want to talk about Cam Grandy, but we're out of time. That's it for this episode.
Dandy? Is that what you're going to say? Dandy Grandy?
Of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We've got mandatory minicamp this week. We'll hear from various Bengals coaches. We'll hear from Joe Burrow. At least that is the plan. So
maybe
until
Cam
next
Grandy.
time, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.